English Channel,
So Paul
also known as
Williams,
the Isle of Man.
yeah, Paul Williams is a guy in the UK, and he created the website VT100.net, which is a nice, history of VT100 and deck terminals. And over time, he started accumulating scans of manuals on his website, and then he hacked up a little web application, a little CGI application in Perl to index his documents and his scans, and he had it online available for anybody to browse. And it didn't have its own host name. It was just like, I think it was just like vt100.net/Manx. And so I've never talked to Paul on audio, only over email, so I don't know how he pronounces it. But given that he's in the UK, it could be that it's Man X to him, or maybe it's Manx. I don't know. Um, but it's basically a database of documentation, and the interesting thing is it knows about mirrors, and it knows about the same document living in multiple places in multiple formats. Maybe in one place it's a bag of TIFF files, in another place it's a PDF, or in a third place it might be a text file or HTML. So it understands formats, it understands mirrors, and it understands part numbers, and it segregates things into companies. But you can also have documents in the database for which there are no known online copies. And you can see on my screen right here that this status column is showing online for some documents, but then there's some documents down here that the database knows about, but there doesn't happen to be any known copy online as far as the database is concerned. So Paul had written all this up in some, he'd hacked it up in some Perl code. And then one day he just took it offline, and everybody was like, "Hey, I was using that." And he was like, "Oh, yeah, I guess other people are using it." And then he put a database dump out of the SQL database. He's like, "Well, here's all the data if somebody wants to go and recreate it." He initially put it back online for a little while. He was like, "But I'm not going to update this thing. I'm not going to add any more data to it. I'm not going to fix the code or do anything to the code." So we said, "Well, we'll take the database dump. We will recreate the website around it." And at the time, it was a group of people from CC Talk who all said that they would be willing to contribute. So that's why I'm saying we. But in the end, and I'm sad to report this, not a single line of code was contributed by anybody but me. And that's not because I'm like a tyrannical dictator or anything. It's just because I wasn't going to wait around. I started working on the code and got it put together in PHP. It's open source, it's on GitHub. We'll go to the repo. So
Yeah,
it's,
and I can't log in with the credentials I sent you.
I haven't
FYI.
manually inserted those credentials into the database yet.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
so the code is here on GitHub. Um, and basically, how this works is you can search. There's a feature request to be able to search for a document across all companies, but right now you can only search by a document within a particular company. So, say controlled data, search for console, and then it has console in the title, so that's how it found this. I can also leave the keywords blank and check this online only box and search, and that'll just show me all the CDC documents that it knows about that have actual online copies. So if we click on one of these, here you can see an example of how it understands mirroring, because it understands that these are the known public mirrors for BitSavers. The primary website for BitSavers is bitsavers.org, and then these are the mirrors. So what's nice is maybe you weren't aware that certain websites had mirrors, by searching Manx instead of just always going to the one URL that you happen to know about, you can find other mirrors and maybe use one that works better for you. Or maybe the main site is down, so then you can go and get a copy off the mirror. You don't have to wait for the main site to come back up. Now, the one thing that we're here to talk about that's different is this login button over here. So if we go here, you log in with the email address and password that I've inserted into the database. I don't have, because this is all written from scratch by hand, and I didn't use a framework because at the time that I wrote this, I really didn't know of any PHP frameworks. They might have existed, but you can get into a discussion of PHP programming and how things have changed since I started this project if you want. But we're mostly here to just talk about the database stuff. So we'll log in. And now that we've logged in, you can see I've got some new links here. The one that's most important is this URL wizard. The bit savers, and this needs to be renamed to Jason's new site name. I haven't updated the code yet. There's an open issue on that. Bit savers and Shy Classic Comp, which is now Vintage Technology Document Archive, VTDA.
Yeah, I have to scroll back in the doc feed channel to remember it. Hey,
Scroll,
there's
to do
also,
what? Scroll back to do what?
I have to scroll back to remember what the name is.
Oh, yeah. I always get the D and the T mixed up in my head. I can never remember which one comes first.
Hey, the
But-
domain was available, all right? Leave me alone.
Yeah. Beggars can't be choosers.
I got to pay for short domain names, and I found a 4-character, and that's what it is. And then I guess that's a retronym, right? The acronym existed first, and then I had to figure out words to fit the letters.
Works for
There you
me. I mean, I tried to get Manx.org, and there was some domain squatters sitting on
Yeah, that'll be tough.
the domain. When I try to get a domain, I try to get the org, the net, and the com, so that nobody can sit on a common,
Yeah.
sister domain, so to speak.
Al told me he's trying to get bitsavers.com, and some guy was squatting in it and wants thousands for it.
Yeah, so I always look for something that I can get all three, and
Yeah.
that's why I chose Manx-Docs, because somebody was squatting on Manx.com or something. At any rate, let's go over here and look at. Let's just start with BitSavers. Oops. Let's go here to the URL wizard. So, the BitSavers and Shy Classic Comp just kind of streamlined this process a little bit, but it's going to work just fine if we do it this way. So one thing we can do is we can go over here to the bitsavers.org PDF RSS feed that I publish, and we can find an interesting doc in here. So what I want to do is find one that has a part number in it to show how that works.
Sorry, so do you need the RSS aggregator Chrome extension here to run this process?
Well, you can use it if I'm just using the RSS feed as a convenient way to find a document that we can use an example of. Like, here's one. Let's try this. Oh, no, that's a bin file. Sorry, it's not a PDF. The RSS feed is completely unrelated to Manx. It's a separate facility that you can use if you find it handy. I'm just using it to pick a candidate document that I know is not in the database.
I can tell you one.
Oh, sure.
Just go to the SEL directory in BitSavers.
Sure. Okay, let's go over here.
I just checked. You have nothing.
So-
Yeah.
Yeah, the company's probably not even in there yet.
Right. You don't have the company, nothing. So
right,
let's do a clean.
Let's take this one.
Add the company, the whole nine. Yeah.
Yeah, this will be good. Okay, so what I did is I went over here. I found a document I was interested in. I copied its URL, and I'm just going to paste it into this box. And all these edit boxes that show up here, they all have a little help icon that you can click to get some explanation for what the field is about. And, it just toggles the help on and off. And because I clicked off the edit field, you notice it automatically filled in a bunch of stuff. So, first off, what I pasted in was a URL from the mirror. I was browsing trailing edge mirror for bit savers. So it took what I pasted and put that in the mirror document field, and it replaced the original document. Sorry, it replaced the document URL with the URL that is for the base site, not the mirror. So it's smart enough. Like I said, it knows about mirrors. It filled in. It's like, hey, I recognize this is PDF format because the file name ended in PDF. The bit savers site. So a site is a place, some web URL that is the base URL for a collection of documents. It already knew that the bitsavers.org site is associated with this URL that begins bitsavers.org/PDF. If we were adding a URL from some new site, you notice this site box appeared now. We can fill in the information there, but we want to use Bitsavers because that's the correct site for the URL. So the wizard really lets you add all the necessary chunks into the database, starting with a URL. If it doesn't know the site, it will, show you that new site box and let you enter the information corresponding to a site. In this case, it has further knowledge about Bitsavers. It knows that the directory underneath PDF is a directory corresponding to a company. And since Cell is not known to it as a directory that is associated with a company, it is showing this new company box. And there's a couple of things here that are just kind of, I could figure them out automatically. But so what's the long form name for Cell?
Systems Engineering Laboratories.
Nearing
Just a sec real quick.
Laboratories.
Yep. Handy.
And
That's
then
right there.
Cell, and then the short name is basically just lowercase version of the short name. And then you can enter in any notes for that particular company if you want. I mean, a mini computer.
Yeah, deck sucks.
No opinions, please, just facts. Okay, so we're going to create this new company. And then down here, it has tried to search for existing publications in the database that might match the URL that you've entered. And what it does is it basically extracts from the URL. It strips off the PDF. It strips off this, which it recognizes as the publication date, and then it takes all the rest of this stuff, strips off everything to the first underscore if it matches a certain regex pattern, and considers that the part number, which it fills in down here. You notice it filled in the publication date, September 1969. And here's its best guess for the title of the document. And it used what it extracted as the title and what it extracted as the part number as search keywords to search for an existing publication in the database. Now, since there's no documents for Cell in the database at all, of course, the publication dropdown is empty. But if it did find documents, it's always good to check this dropdown to see if maybe it already knows about the document. Because as I mentioned before, it knows about documents even if it doesn't have known URLs for those documents. So it's not thousands and thousands of documents that are in the database that have no URL, but there is a significant number. So it's always good to check this publication search dropdown. And if you found that the search results were returning like hundreds of things, you can adjust these search terms. Like I can strip out this part number if it's not really a part number. And as soon as I tab off, it'll do the search again and repopulate this drop-down box. Of course, since there are no Cell documents, it's never going to find anything. We can fix this title by just calling this manual. And it's a document. These revision fields and keywords and notes, we can add that information. Manx also knows about the fact that documents are versioned and newer versions of a document supersede an earlier version. and that's this supersession section down here. Again, you can do a keyword search to find the document that is superseded by this one, or to find the document that supersedes this one. So that's how all these fields work. Most of the time, you won't see this company box because you only need to add a company the first time when you associate a BitSavers subdirectory or a VTDA subdirectory with a company. And once you do that, then it remembers that and fills it all out. The next time it'll basically populate this drop down or select an entry from this drop down, and then these edit fields go away. And the values in the edit fields are remembered. So if you accidentally select that and like, oops, that's wrong, I needed it to be a new company, just select it back and the values that you had entered will
So entering the document with a new company name creates a company entry. You don't have to do that separately.
That's correct. Basically, this URL wizard is a one-stop shop to populate everything in the database that's necessary for this document to be recorded. And these sections, if it were like, for instance, if it wasn't on a known site, if it wasn't BitSavers, then the site box would appear. If it were not a known company, then the company box appears. The publication box always appears. What happens is if you find out that maybe this is a new copy of a document that Manx already knows about, so you would use the search keywords to verify that it's the correct document, and then you pick it from the drop down, and then this publication box would collapse to just the known document, the known publication. Now, there's one thing I haven't mentioned yet, and this is our last chance to double check all the the information that it extracted automatically. And that's that if up here in this copy box, you may have noticed that this is a link. And this is a link to our original URL that we entered. And what I like to do is I like to open that in a new tab, and then I just quickly check that the part number was correct. Let me make this a little bigger. So I like to double check that the part number was correctly taken from the document. So 301-860-000-000, that's correctly recorded in the document file name, which is where Manx figured it out from. I like to check the date. This is saying, it says 1969 here, and it says September 69 here. So the date in the file name is correct. Now, what's interesting is they've changed the title a little bit, because as it is written on this document, it says Reference Manual Systems 86 Computer. But what they put in the title was Systems 86 Reference Manual. So what I like to do, and this is entirely optional, it's just because I like to strive for accuracy as much as possible in the database. I like to, if what's in the file name doesn't exactly match what's shown on the document itself, I take the document as the source of truth. So let's go over here and make this Reference Manual Systems 86 Computer, just like it says on the PDF. So it did a good job at guessing. I mean, this isn't a bad starting point, but as you notice, like they abbreviated manual to man. So, but even if you didn't modify this at all, it would be better than nothing. But I like to get it correct as possible when I enter the data this time, because I haven't yet written any code to edit the entries. So I have to edit the entries with manual SQL statements, which I'm willing to do on a one-by-one basis, but it's not scalable, obviously. And that's for future development on the code, is to make editing easy. So I just like to double check this. Sometimes information like part numbers and stuff are hidden on the very last page of the document. Sometimes publication dates, like especially on brochures, the document identifier, the part number, if you will be written in, in rotated text, like somewhere like on the corner, and it might have a little cryptic date code, like 8/83, instead of explicitly saying something. Some brochures don't have, and some manuals too, don't have any information about the date, in which case you just leave it blank. It'll be blank because it couldn't figure it out from the URL. Okay, so we double checked the PDF, and again, double checking the PDF against what's in the URL. It's entirely optional, but it's something I like to do just because I like to be accurate as much as possible. Also, if it couldn't figure out a date because it wasn't in the URL or there wasn't a part number in the URL, it's always good to just open that PDF up real quick just to see if there is one, but it just didn't make it into the file name. Not everybody follows that convention. The code is smart enough to figure out, let me go here. It's smart enough to figure out, a 3-letter month name and then a 2-digit year afterwards. It's smart enough to figure that out. That means 1969, not year 69. If it's a 4-digit year, it is fine with that. It's a bit of a heuristic the way it analyzes the file name, but it's pretty good. Okay, so we double check the PDF. Everything looks good. We just click next. And it just, in case we accidentally hit that button, we didn't mean to, it gives a confirmation dialog. We say okay, and now it's entered that into the database. And you notice because it was on BitSavers, it knows there's all these mirrors. And it, I happen to use the trailing edge mirror most of the time, which is why this is showing as browsed, because we opened up the PDF and it added the company name. And this link basically takes you to searching for all the entries in the database by that company. This is where the long form comes in. And that's it. That's basically all you need to do. And this URL wizard, as I said, will work for any URL in the wild. So if you have your own website and you want your documents entered into here, you just start with that URL. And if it's a site it doesn't recognize, it'll prompt you for the information that corresponds to your site. These notes and credits fields do appear in the listing if they are populated. They will basically show up. The notes and the credits are associated with the copy of the document, so they will show up here. And that's basically all there is to it. Now, let's see if this is working. Okay, so now that's going from the URL wizard. And this interface is going to change to be one that's more useful, which was a suggestion made by Jason to browse by directory instead of by this current schematic, but this is the way it is right now. And so the way this works is if it's a site like BitSavers that has an index by date.txt file, I have a cron job that I run periodically, or sometimes I run it manually, to fetch a new version of that index by date.txt, parse through that file, and add them here. So these are publications that it saw in the index by date.txt that it couldn't find a corresponding URL for in its database. This ID is just basically the number, the line number of, or the, it's just an increasing identifier associated with these unknown documents. So the browsing is pretty primitive. Right now, it shows up as it starts with the most recent documents that it found first. So it goes by ID descending. If you click these fields, it shows it in like a pseudo random order first, I guess. Or maybe it's by, I can't remember if it's increasing ID or, looks like it's increasing ID by default. And you click this and then you can change it to decreasing ID, or you can sort by path. Now, because the index by date.txt file has every file in it, and not every file is a document, So here's an example of like this stickers.jpg. We can open a new window, and that brings us to what I did was open this link in a new tab, and it populated the URL field in the URL wizard, and it's saying there's no document there. That's because I think I have a bug here in the way that this URL was constructed, because this is probably like under computers or something. Do you happen to remember where that? You notice there's like a subdirectory here that's missing in the URL. I bet if we went over and browsed, we could find the real URL. This is just a guard against you having a typo if you type in the URL incorrectly. It does just a little head request to find out if that URL is valid, and that's what this is saying is like, oh, I went and tried to look at that and I couldn't even find it. My recommendation is stay with the URL wizard for now, because I've clearly got some bugs in these BitSavers and Shy Classic Comp tabs, and it's because of I have some partial changes that I've committed to master and deployed to get to where we could browse by directory, and I've clearly goofed this up. It's not working correctly. But the idea is, let's get back to here. The idea for this was, it's a URL that's mentioned in the index by date, but it's not actually a document. So the idea is you could say ignore that, because it, sometimes Al puts like, prom dumps and stuff inside the PDF folders, and technically they're not documents, but he puts them to have them adjacent to each other so people can find them easily. So we can ignore those and say like, yeah, that's not a document that we want to index. We can navigate through these lists using these page numbers, and the page numbers advance, or the next button. It's the same thing as going to the next page. They advance by just, I think I'm showing like 10 entries here. So they advance 10 at a time. This arrow advances 100 pages. So if you are looking for a particular thing and it's where it is according to the path, that's how this is wrong, because this should be showing the full sub path underneath the Shy Classic Comp site. So that's what's wrong with this. So these should not be just file names. They should be full paths.
Yeah, could I propose that you kind of move past this, because obviously there's a bug in place right now, and we pose some questions.
Sure. Let me just finish up on this. So the only reason I'm spending time on this is because the idea was to streamline it for these two sites even more, so that you wouldn't even have to copy and paste the document URL. Not like that's a big burden, but anyway, that's the idea. Obviously, I've got some bugs there, but we'll get that sorted out. But okay, yeah, let's go to any questions that you might have.
Sure. Yeah, and that address is one of them on the bulk automated URL import. It looks like how you're trying to accommodate that is for those two specific sites, and obviously it'd be great if you could just sign in and see, going backwards, the most recent that is not in the database but showed up in one of the indexes. And just knock them out one by one. That'd be great. So if that functionality is operational, where once you click, submit or whatever, you're just taken to the next one in your URL list. That'd be great. It'd be even better if we could submit our own URL lists via CSV. So that'd just be a feature request. But I get what you're trying to do with that. The limitation on scope to it appears to be PDF manuals. Would you expound a little bit on that in terms of why the limitation and what that limitation is in your mind?
You mean why it's just manuals and nothing else?
Right, right. Like binaries, for instance, which some of the manuals without the corresponding diagnostics, binaries, even sometimes images,
Uh,
are not very useful. So I'm just curious what the thinking is there.
I sometimes like the individual. Let's do this. Sometimes the individual deck diagnostics, have like their own kind of listing. Like this one, I think. They have their own part number, and it's this kind of like, I guess this is the documentation for the diagnostic. Um, so if I can repeat your question to make sure I understand it correctly, more broadly speaking, why don't we index like binaries or source code or anything like that? Is that the question?
Essentially, yes. A lot of these manuals are not very useful without their corresponding binaries, source listings, what have you, right? They literally just please refer to X, right? Which would be excluded from this database, which would limit its functionality, right? Like for instance, for my use case, this wouldn't solve my use case for sure.
Well, let me ask you: if
Um,
you're just browsing BitSavers or another site, how do you find that stuff?
it's
Is it
there
always
in the directory under bits, right?
right? I
Um,
mean, it's over in bits, right? I mean, the way Al
right.
organizes things, and I've kind of copied that. You got docs and bits. So if you find the
Mm-hmm.
deck manual and it says it wants a particular bit, you got to go to another URL structure to find the bits if it's there at all.
Right.
I mean, I've kind of weighed the pros and cons of doing it that way rather than keeping them all together. But how would Manx deal with that? I don't know.
Well, in the database, it would simply be a different document type,
Yeah,
right? So format would be bin.
yeah, you can do
So,
that.
I mean,
But
that could
would
be
there be a way
done.
for Manx to make that connection between the two of them, or is that too much?
Well, that would be manufacturer,
Yeah,
right? And then part number.
yeah, and
So
I suppose they might
everything's
have
referred to
similar,
as part number, right?
and they might have similar part numbers, I guess, right?
No, that's the idea. Is that most of the manufacturers had some correlation between the name of part number for the manual and the part number for the software. I know SEL did. I think DEC did in general. So that's kind of where my thought is.
So the certainly no, I certainly have no objection to that feature request. Um, this started out as a database of manuals. Like I said, Paul Williams put it together. I think he was into terminals, and so he started accumulating all these manuals on terminals, even if he didn't have the terminal itself. So that's just the historical reason why it doesn't have that kind of information associated with it. Um, I don't see any problem with that as a feature request. The only thing I'm going to say is the only person contributing code is me. So um, if somebody
Right.
wanted that
Yeah.
feature and contributed a pull request to GitHub, I'd be happy to accept it. But in terms of my own personal priorities of what I want to work on, we can take a look over here at GitHub. And if we look at the issues, I've tried to tag them all with the kind of thing that they are relating to. And I have milestones. Let me go to all milestones. So this is my plan for what I personally am trying to get done. And this browse unknown paths by directory is what I'm trying to do in the next release. And you can see I got a few more things to do before I consider that done. And then, obviously I deployed a half-baked thing to production, so it's not quite working. But I wasn't worried about it because it didn't affect searching. It only affected um, those customized bit savers and Shy Classic comp tabs. And then my next milestone is I wanted to make it easier to process an entire directory of documents and get them curated into the database all at once. And then you guys might not have ever tried to browse this website on your phone, but it looks pretty hideous. Going to the questions in the chat. Um, so we talked about number one, the binaries. And when you were asking about bulk automated URL import, you were thinking
Exactly
as a
what it looks
user.
like you're starting to address, right? With the bit savers and G Classic Comp, pulling in those URLs, but a user facing feature where I could specify like a directory on one of those sites or another site, pull those in, or a CSV. There's 100 different ways of skinning the cat. I don't want to tell
Right.
you as the product owner what to do with that.
Ooh, I'm a product
You're
owner.
already going down one path. Well, aren't you?
Yes. Well, let me see if I can restate it back to you, and then you tell me if I understand what you're asking for. Did you want to have a list of URLs that you personally are going to curate into the database, just as like a working list, and you just want to bulk import that list and then work through them?
That'd be
A
one
list of
option.
stuff
Or
to
you can
be
specify a CSV format, um, and I can write my own logic to populate those fields, and then you can accept the CSV from trusted contributors. Or you can modify the existing process to be able to search against the subset of URLs that you have in those two pages, the Chi Classic Comp and BitSavers. If I could go in there and then search for SEL or the first part of the URL, see all of those that you've already got those in that section,
yeah.
and then say and click a box and then press a button that says curate, and it'll just pop them up for me one by one, and I go through the process you showed here. That would be a solution. um,
So let me. I think I
Create a
have.
REST API, and I can do it myself. Any of those.
So I think I have in this per directory document ingestion. Um, the idea
Mhm.
there was, and as Jason pointed out, and I agree once I thought about it, that like the way I had it, like sorting by ID and by path, it wasn't really a convenient way to browse. And what you really want to do is just kind of drill into directories. So if you drilled into the cell directory, then you would see all the documents in that directory that it doesn't know about. And the per directory document ingestion idea was you kind of say, okay, I'm looking at this directory, and then you just see a table where it says, I already know about the company, so I can just fill out the document data of the title and the part number and the publication date. And if you wanted to add more detail for those individual documents, you could process them individually. But the idea was that's the main information we want: publication date, title, part number. If that can be automatically extracted in a way that is quick and easy for an entire directory, then you could just submit all the results for that entire directory, giving you a chance to edit those three fields to correct any minor mistakes, like if it says man instead of manual or whatnot.
Sure.
That was the idea there, was to um, say for certain companies and certain directories on BitSavers, the documents are already well structured in terms of the metadata. So we don't need to manually review the document to get the part number out or the publication date out. We can just get it from the file name. And then we can just process that whole directory at once, maybe deselecting a few items that don't follow the pattern. So you kind of more curating in batches instead of onesie twosie. So I think that would get at your use case in terms of a user interface. Um, at VCF Midwest, somebody approached me about bulk integrating a bunch of documents that already had in a CSV file, and I don't have any code for bulk integration. What I do right now is manually write SQL to do it. And I just suggested to the guy, I'm like, well, the code is on GitHub, including all the database schema and everything. So you can figure out how to do that and then send me your database and I can merge it into my database or something like that. Things are always possible, but it's a matter of who has the time to code something and who's going to do it. And if it's me doing the code, well, this is my outline of the stuff that I'm working on. Um, but it's on
Right, and knows
GitHub, so anybody
PHP.
could contribute.
Right.
The-
Anybody who knows PHP. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even want to use PHP. I wanted to use Ruby because Ruby's really good for this. Is basically a CRUD web application: create, read, update, delete. Ruby has a great framework for doing that. And that's what I wanted to use initially. But the other people who were going to quote unquote contribute, they all said, well, we know PHP, we don't know Ruby. So that's why it ended up being PHP.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
final
No
question,
judgment. It is what it is, right?
well,
Yeah.
PHP is pretty horrible in my opinion, but it is widely deployable and known.
Horrible working code trumps theoretical pretty code.
I will just
Right.
mention here that on the code, I have written unit tests for everything that's in here. So
That's awesome.
code is
Congratulations.
pretty high quality and it's pretty well organized. I treated it as a serious project because I knew it had the potential to get very large in scope, and I didn't want crufty code to be the impediment that prevents somebody from contributing. The schema folder holds the evolution of the database schema by these increasing numbered files. And there was a final question in the chat about generating checksums for the documents. The database does have an MD5 for documents.
Perfect.
You notice over here there's an MD5 that's computed for this document. I used to calculate the MD5 when you ingested the document into the database, but for very large files and slow archives, or if the web server where my code is hosted is loaded, what would happen is fetching the whole document to compute the MD5 at ingestion time would result in a server timeout. So what I do now is I leave that field blank, and this MD5 report page shows you documents that have missing MD5s. Unfortunately, the repair is not going to work because for the same reason I pointed out, that it'll just server timeout. But what I do now is I have a cron job that runs, basically it runs this report and then it generates the MD5s and sticks them in the database. Also, some of these guys might not have MD5s because the site might have gone down since it was added to the database. I have to I have an open issue on GitHub to go and figure out a way to find out if the sites are offline. Like if we click on this, this takes us to the site. Over here in the About page, it is like, here's all the sites that it knows about. And you notice some of them, they say like low bandwidth, because it's hosted on some guy's PC on a, dynamic DNS connection or whatever. And, it's just slow. So when you see a document and it has a copy and the site is on a known low bandwidth site, it'll say that here next to the site name. But that's why I don't have the checksums generated for that document that we just entered. So if we go back over here,
Maybe as a someday thing, I'm writing
I have a cron job that will do it.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say I'm writing an indexer for my files, and I have a local copy of BitSavers. I suppose I could turn it against that too. So maybe you can do something to import from my database when, sometime later when there actually is a database. But I have ideas. That's all I have.
I've noticed on the site a number of Deck Rainbow manuals that don't show up, but I know are on the web somewhere. Some of it on BitSavers and some of it elsewhere.
Right.
So I would love to contribute copies of those if.
Yeah. So
so that kind of segues to my next request. How do I get an account?
send me an email.
I have the PC100 specification and the terminal emulator manual and a couple others, and I know some of those are also on Al's site.
Yeah, I mean, Al adds things to bit savers faster than I'm. Basically, it's just been me manually adding stuff. I think Jason's added some stuff for his site. He has an account. Um, so I haven't mentioned it, but there's also this log out link over here, so you can log out. I think I've got it so that it will expire your session after like 30 minutes. Um, in terms of getting an account, just send me an email with what you want your email address to be used for the site and the password that you want, and I will create that. Now, there's no, I mean, I have the highest authority on this site, and you notice there's no like user administration links or anything like that. The user accounts are created by me by running a SQL command and manually entering it into the database. Because as I said, I didn't have a PHP framework for this sort of thing available to me at the time, so everything is bespoke, custom. I'd like to switch it to using some kind of framework, and that would get me some features for free without having to write them manually. So I'm trying to be smart about how to go forward in evolving the code, so I don't have to keep doing everything 100% from scratch. So email, I'll type it into the chat as well as say it. So you want to email legalize@xmission.com with what you would like your email address associated with your account to be and password. And then once that's created, if your password needs to be changed, you have to email me and I can change it. But
I have to drop in like 1 minute here, but are you using Schema version 2.1?
In terms of the
8 dash in GitHub?
it is all these schema files have been applied in terms of what is deployed on the production site. All
Okay,
my
so you're
development takes place in
yeah.
a development branch, and this is the master branch. On the develop branch, there's I guess I haven't changed the schema in terms of what I've pushed up to develop. I've got changes on my local machine, but I haven't pushed them.
Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to figure out exactly because like for instance, you've got your engine set to my ISAM. So
Yeah,
I was just curious which exact version of these files is deployed.
whatever's on
Um,
master.
whatever's on them, and you're applying all of them, all 8 schema files.
Yeah, I mean, master is connected to a database that already has most of the schema changes applied. So when I deploy a new version, I just apply the schema parts that have changed. I don't restart the database from nothing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because
All
in
right.
these,
Well,
this
thank you
is
very
just
much.
the schema, right? The data is not recorded here. So if I started from nothing, I'd have to somehow mix in also re-entering all the data. I have database backups, of course, but
I do have to drop, but yeah, no, I sent you username and password. Set me up, and I'll start importing. Okay.
that sounds great. And that we're basically done in terms of what I wanted to cover as well. Um, is there any other? Did you have any other questions before you go?
No, I really have to run, but thank you very
Okay,
much. It's been informative.
thanks.
Bye bye.
Anybody else have any other questions? All right.
I guess my only other question would be if I run into trouble, just catch you on Discord.
Or email me. Or if
Okay.
if you see something that just looks wrong, you can go to GitHub and file a bug report.
Okay, that sounds good. I've got both this website and the GitHub up on my screen, so I'll be able to find it later. Because, everybody needs 814 tabs open in their Chrome
Yeah,
browser.
and at the so you have to fix this, but this link is stale. I need to. It used to be on Codeplex. I had a link to it, and I should change that to fix it to be GitHub because that's
Okay.
really a shame.
No, I'm easy. All the questions I had got asked and answered either by your presentation or by other people. So I'm good.
All right, great. You got any questions, Jason?
How sensitive is it to, we talked about this before. Can you describe or publish the correct file naming convention that Manx wants? Because I'll
That works
submit.
the best.
I'll,
I mean, if we go over to vtda.org and then, raw docs, computing, probably don't have this. Oh, it's not going to know about, if I do Shide Classic comp, will it work?
there should be a pass with a dot. Yeah. I think I wrote the redirect rule correctly. It should pick it up. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. So if I take
Direct
this
to Slack.
document URL and log in, go to URL wizard and change it to, I don't know if this is going to work. It got confused because of the redirect, I think.
Or the double
But the part
slash.
we were interested in was how well did it do on the title? And you notice it didn't know that this change in case meant a word change, and
Right.
it doesn't, should there be a space here? I mean, you can correct it all manually,
Yeah.
but it works better with underscores.
Yeah.
So that's why, like, the one underscore, oh, I know what it was. Because it had one underscore, it assumed that all the words in the title were separated with underscore.
See. It's a very old file and not how I even name things anymore. But
What's a newer
how
one?
about stuff with no part numbers? Because my style. It's kind of like BitSavers. It's part number underscore title underscore date.
Yeah,
But a lot of stuff doesn't have part numbers.
can you tell me a more recent one that you would like to try?
Summa Graphics I uploaded last night,
Okay, so
and I
Summa
did
Graphics.
There you go. So I put underscores there to separate it how you like.
Oh, let's try one that doesn't have the underscores no underscores at all to see how well it does on that. Like maybe
I can
televideo.
poke around.
Okay,
There's
here's one.
Because that's an advertisement. It's out of a magazine. Doesn't have any.
So you can see it didn't quite recognize that this was a date at the end.
Yeah.
But for the rest of it, it was like, oh, there's no underscores. So my best guess is to separate everything with spaces where the case change happened. It's a heuristic.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to foolproof that.
Yeah, I mean, I would call it a bug that it didn't recognize this was a date. That's just wrong. Because if it had recognized that as a date, then that would be correct.
And it would have stuck it in publication date?
It would have what?
Would it have put it in the publication date field, or is it not that smart?
If it had recognized the date correctly, then yes, this would, what was it?
I debate how to represent dates too. I'm not even sure why I started doing it that way with the described month, because for periodicals it's terrible. It doesn't put things in order. I've made a lot of.
It's not.
I'm doing this for like 12 years now. Made a lot of changes over there.
So it's year-month-day. I should make this help text more explicit about the format.
Yeah.
But if it had extracted it automatically, it would have written in here something like this.
Right.
So, the idea was not perfection, because that's impossible, but to be as good as possible in guessing what it should be and give you a chance to correct it before you submit it. So most of the time it's like, oh yeah, it didn't, get the date right, so we'll just edit that out, blah, blah, blah. It's all, I think, unfortunately, I think too many things are hard coded to the old site name here, and the redirects are probably just confusing it. Notice it's
Mhm.
like it doesn't even understand that, that
Right.
site already exists. It thinks it's a new site.
Throw a content after docs/content/. I'm just curious if it picks that up, because that redirect should
Um,
work also. Because that's what the old Chat Classic Comp full URL was, and that's one reason I got rid of it, because it was just
Hey, I gotta run, guys.
okay.
yeah.
Thanks so much. I'll catch the end of this on the recording when you post it.
All right. Thank you for attending.
Yeah.
See you then.
Yeah, I just need to correct a few things for the new VTDA structure. I got a bug open on it. I just haven't found time to work on it yet. But I mean, it's been low priority because it doesn't affect browsing. It
Yeah.
only affects entering data. But now that we're going to get some other people entering data, there's like a few little things I should just fix. And before I make their accounts, so that it's not completely busted. Any other questions before we go, Jason?
What language would you recommend? Because I'm going to be a noob at pretty much all of them, but which ones can easily write to a SQL-like database? Or that's what I'm thinking I'm going to do for this thing little bit. It's going to build a master index of my stuff. I could use it as a vehicle to learn a little Python.
Okay.
Beyond that, I
Let's
don't know.
let me. It's kind of tangential, so I'm going to end the recording.